This Thor News video is intended for adults who have the ability to think critically and ask and sometimes answer big questions. If that ain't you, GTFO, B. Alright, with that out of the way, this is a Thor News presentation. Thor News presents...
Guys, I'm bringing the party to you.
Fox business can hardly keep up with the corporate crime. Barclays, JP Morgan Chase.
There's a storm coming.
So this is no longer just a Wall Street crisis, this is an American crisis.
How did we reach this point in our economy?
You know, we're going to see a laboratory experiment in America.
I have that within me also, and that's why John McCain tapped me to be a team of mavericks, of independents, as a team member in this, on this new team promising the reform.
$700 billion of your money to a few banks on Wall Street.
They play by their own rules, and I'm tempted to ask how many people in this room are in the payroll of Fannie Mae.
You have to bribe highly paid, powerful people just to do their jobs. With all the prestige and all the money, you want to give them incentive. I don't know, Keith, what's your incentive to do your job, or me to do mine, or a gas station attendant to pump gas?
So I propose that the federal government supply urgently needed money so banks and other financial institutions can avoid collapse. It will help American consumers and businesses get credit to meet their daily needs and create jobs.
We've never seen anything like this, in that it is a global phenomenon. And, you know, that's the other side of a world economy, is that we are reliant on one another, for better or for worse. And in this circumstance, I mean, literally, the global economy is collapsing. So it's unprecedented times.
Economic update of the financial state, part 1. Steady as she goes, right off the cliff. Because today was the tip of the iceberg, which is the first possible correction of the financial markets in the last 6 years. Quantitative easing is theoretically going to end soon. The jawbones that have been waved around have said.
First, I said we needed an independent board to provide oversight and accountability for how and where this money is spent at every step of the way.
The question of the government infusion of dollars there was going to make the difference between whether they got paid off in full or they ended up with nothing.
Right, but maybe shall you finish. So where are you going? What would you like? What would you like to know?
I just want to know, did Treasury have conversations with any of the counterparties who ultimately profited?
I was not the Secretary of the Treasury at the time of the initial invention, but I was the president of the New York Fed. And of course, I was central to the basic judgment we reached together to prevent default by AIG. I'm sure that was the right judgment at the time, and you're right to point out that that action did help make the system more stable, did have broad benefits to stability of the system, including the direct counterparties. But
this makes me angry. I think it makes the American people angry that their tax money has to be put at risk. But at the end of the day, this isn't about Wall Street, and it's not about commercial paper and all of the other nonsense you hear talked about. It's about protecting our economy, protecting Americans' jobs, their bank accounts, their retirement securities, their college savings fund. And this is not a time for ideological purity. I'm a free market non-interventionist, but we face a crisis. And if we don't act, and we don't act quickly, we're going to jeopardize our economy.
I understand why people would be skeptical when this president asks for a blank check to solve a problem.
In the depths of the financial crisis, central banks around the world embarked on an unprecedented course of monetary policy. To keep interest rates low and provide economic stimulus, they engaged in large-scale asset purchases, resulting in a massive expansion of their balance sheets.
And if you don't know what quantitative easing is, it's where the Federal Reserve has spent about $4.4 trillion in the last 6 years buying up Treasury bills, bonds, and mortgage-backed securities. And I'm pretty sure they have the right to buy whatever they want. So, since that's been happening, the stock markets have been skyrocketing. But they said they plan to end it in October. Now they've gone from $85 billion a month for about 5.5 years, and they dropped down to $65 billion. So they're like easing Wall Street off the financial liquidity heroin. So I'm doing research on the story because the markets went down 2% today, which may not sound like much, but October's not that far away. To me, the Federal Reserve is the only game in town. I do not believe in either party, Republican or Democrat. I think they played the lesser of two evils game to the T in what is horribly fine kabuki theater. They're like wrestlers. They fake being mad at each other, but they both get rich and powerful and famous.
This was an urgent situation and is an urgent situation.
On September the 13th, the Federal Reserve, the US central bank, announced a new program of quantitative easing, the creation of money to try and boost the economy. Like Pavlov's dogs, the stock market salivated.
Did you hear about the Fed?
No. What about the Fed?
They announced another round of the quantitative easing.
What does that mean?
It means they are going to make large asset purchases via PAMO.
What does that mean?
It means they are going to expand their balance sheet and buy treasuries.
What does that mean?
It means they are going to print a ton of money.
So why do they call it the quantitative easing? Why don't they just call it the printing money?
Because the printing money is the last refuge of failed economic empires and banana republics, and the Fed doesn't want to admit this is their only idea.
Stabilize the markets and protect the taxpayer.
Right, but then in 2009 we passed that separate bill on compensation, which had some restrictions. The limits we put on were too stringent. So if the bill we had passed in 2009, remember it was after the AIG bonuses and there was this retroactive bill, and we were then asked by the Speaker to come forward with a bill to deal with compensation for the recipients of federal funding of various kinds, and we included Fannie and Freddie, and we had limits, and I forget exactly what the numbers were. We will get them for you.
What do you think, though, should be done? Do you think
nothing can be done now? We're the legislators. We passed a bill with regard to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The Senate can pass those. It's hard to do these things retroactively, but it could affect bonuses going forward in the Economic Recovery Act, prospectively, not retroactively, putting limits on the bonuses that could be given and the compensation, not just bonuses, on the compensation that could be given to all the recipients, including Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It passed the House. The Republicans opposed it, and then it died in the Senate. So, I mean, I have no authority over them.
We'll be having vigorous oversight this week, hearings this week, on regulatory reform and other aspects of it. I hope you will pursue fraud and mismanagement and the rest.
What the bailout does is help those who are concerned about the health care reform that is needed to help shore up our economy, helping the... It's got to be all about job creation, too, shoring up our economy and putting it back on the right track. So healthcare reform and reducing taxes and reining in spending has got to accompany tax reductions and tax relief for Americans. And trade, we've got to see trade as opportunity, not as a competitive, scary thing, but 1 in 5 jobs being created in the trade sector today. We've got to look at that as more opportunity. All those things under the umbrella of job creation. This bailout is a part of that.
This is what I don't understand. In 2005, in the Banking Committee, Senator Dodd and all the Democrats on the Banking Committee blocked regulatory action against Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They blocked it.
Well, what they were looking for, what they were looking for was a specific balance in that. Look, the problem is, let's talk about the big picture, Bill, because it's really what's important here. And in that big picture, everybody understands that Washington's been broken for the last years.
But experts still have some concerns about the financial sector's ability to withstand another Lehman-type storm.
There's still some things that are a little make me uneasy. First is we still have very large financial institutions, and despite their higher levels of capital, you still have to worry. If they got into financial difficulties, what would happen?
I mean, when it's called a bailout, nobody's in favor of a bailout.
Reuters is reporting that President Barack Obama defended the Federal Reserve's policy of printing more dollars as China and Russia criticized the U.S. for the practice on Monday. Obama said during his trip to India, quote, "I will say that the Fed's mandate, my mandate, is to grow our economy. And that's not just good for the United States, that's good for the world as a whole.
So why do they want to print the money?
Because they say we have the deflation, and the deflation is very bad.
What is the deflation?
The deflation is when prices of the things we buy go down.
Isn't that good? Doesn't it mean the people can buy more of the stuff?
Yes, but the Fed said this is bad, especially during the recession.
So they think that during the recession, when the people have less money to buy the stuff, it is bad that the prices go down?
Yes, the Fed would rather have the inflation.
So why does the Fed think we have the deflation?
Because the CPI said so.
But aren't the food prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the gas prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the healthcare costs higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't tuition prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the taxes higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the subway fares higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the stock prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
Aren't the bond prices higher than a year ago?
Yes.
So what is deflating right now?
The only thing deflating that I can see is the Fed's credibility.
You bring it back to the Fed, and I think people are very concerned. Sarah talked about the bond market. I mean, the two-year notes at 3-year highs on yields.
This rescue effort is not aimed at preserving any individual company or industry. It is aimed at preserving America's overall economy. It will help American consumers and businesses get credit to meet their daily needs and create jobs. And it will help send a signal to markets around the world that America's financial system is back on track.
U.S. President Barack Obama has defended the administration's handling of the 2008 financial crisis on the 5th anniversary of Lehman Brothers collapse.
The president says, although the economy is on the mend, it's not yet where it needs to be.
We've cleared away the rubble from the financial crisis, and we've begun to lay a new foundation for economic growth and prosperity. On this 5-year anniversary, we should take note of how far we've come from where we were 5 years ago. If American taxpayers are financing the solution, then you should be treated like investors. You should get every penny of your tax dollars back once this economy recovers. That's only fair. That's only right.
Quantitative easing involves the creation of new money, not the literal printing of money as used to occur, but the creation of money with a click of a computer mouse. When an investor sells government bonds or another asset to the central bank credits the bank account of that investor with new money. The aim is to encourage investors to leave safe assets like government bonds and invest in riskier assets like shares.
We're still putting taxpayer dollars at risk.
Chrysler and GM, insolvent company, AIG, insolvent company. Chrysler and GM have bondholders, unsecured creditors, secured creditors, and employees, and they all took big haircuts. AIG had people holding credit default swaps, and they took no haircut at all. They ended up with money from the federal government, 100 cents on the dollar, and I'm trying to understand why those two are different from each other.
But you've spent your life thinking through these things, so you understand this better than many people. And it is sort of the tragic failure about the regime we came in with, because we did not have the legal capacity to manage the orderly unwinding of a large, complex financial institution, capacity we do have for small banks and thrifts, but did not have for an entity like AIG. And that forced us to do things that we would not ever want to do. But
are you saying that you couldn't find a way to pay less than 100 cents on the dollar there, but since you could find a way in the auto industry,
we would have done that in a second if we could have done that. But in deciding that default by AIG would have presented the risk of further systemic damage to a very fragile system, we made the judgment to prevent default. By preventing default, we helped AIG meet its financial obligations, not just to people that brought insurance protection, savings protection products, but to its broad counterparties. That is the consequences of that. And if you think through...
But not the same for the auto industry.
Well, completely different situation, you're right. But if you think through what happens when you let default happen, you can look at the wake of the trauma caused by Lehman's default to get some sense of the damage that can cause. And again, that's why we've moved so quickly to propose broad resolution authority to give us better tools for dealing with these in the future.
And I appreciate that.
And yesterday, at the final hour, the economy minister showed up. It was 12 hours of talks, and it was people are feeling very optimistic.
It was originally the 9 CEOs of the first 9 companies that got large amounts of TARP money. The first 150 billion went basically to 9 large companies. Since then, the 9 became 8 because Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch. These are very wealthy people, very highly paid, that are doing important jobs.
Let's get to our Bob Bassani. Bob, what was behind all the red arrows?
One is global concerns. We might have to deal with higher interest rates. It all fell apart. I'm not holding on. There's not going to be a rally. And they basically sell very quickly.
This is an extraordinary period for America's economy.
Almost all the big important rates in the economy I can think of, the LIBOR is the easiest to manipulate.
Yeah, let's identify where we are. 17,000 the high on July 16th, 10% correction. I put in 18% bear market. We're nowhere near that.
Yeah, we've had all this slightly before, haven't we? I mean, this all happened about 2 or 3 months ago when the same thought was going through everybody's head, and the markets fell like a stone as a result. Is that going to happen again once the message becomes really clear that this support is going to disappear?
Well, that's the big game, isn't it? When we look back over the summer, for example, a lot of the investment banks, their fixed income divisions, they were really pummeled in the bond markets by what was going on there, and this big guessing game. So no one quite knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, Nicole's going to stick around because we're going to be talking with her more about it.
Yeah, because President Obama is pushing for more government power against Wall Street.
Does Argentina have the option of defaulting on just this debt, but not all of its restructured debt from 2003?
No, because there's cross default across all the external exchange bonds. So it wouldn't be defaulting on its local law bonds that are separate and not from the restructuring, but these exchange bonds would be a cross default. And so it's not just the $539 million coupon payment that was blocked, but if investors choose to accelerate on their cross defaulted bonds, then you're talking about $30 billion.
But the investors have a choice.
The investors have a choice.
Okay.
We've seen triple-digit swings in the stock market. Major financial institutions have teetered on the edge of collapse, and some have failed. As uncertainty has grown, many banks have restricted lending. Credit markets have frozen, and families and businesses have found it harder to borrow money. We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action. We boosted confidence in money market mutual funds. Most importantly, my administration is working with Congress to address the root cause behind much of the instability in our markets.
Devil's in the details. When you turn it upside down, it is 666.
Well, everyone got the opportunity to blame Wall Street if they wanted to, and it seems like only Ron Paul took them up on it.
LIBOR.
We have to talk about LIBOR. Now there's an interest rate rigging scandal that has been rocking Barclays. It's all about LIBOR. It's all about the case.
Because LIBOR is such an important benchmark rate.
Systematically rigging rate.
LIBOR.
Systematically rigging rate.
Hundreds of trillions of dollars.
LIBOR.
What?
First of all, what is it?
So in terms of a pullback, I think 6-7% here is entirely reasonable. It's been 426 trading days since we last tested the 200-day average. The Russell 2000.
That's 2 years.
2 years.
This is on everyone's mind. What are you expecting?
We don't really know. There have been a lot of turn of events over the last 24 hours.
You mean they didn't see the internet stock bubble?
No.
Traders still have some concerns. Sarah, what have you found?
That's right, Scarlett. Not only has Greece not gone away, it's actually gotten worse. Moody's set the tone this week, saying the nation faces a high risk of economic, quote, slow death. The markets quickly followed. Now, this is a look at the cost of insuring Greek sovereign debt against default. We have seen some big moves here this week, very scary.
So they have ruled they view this as a credit event. It's going to trigger these swaps.
The default could trigger $1 billion of credit default swaps. What's the impact of that?
Somewhat imprecise process of auction and negotiation happens.
Okay, now we're looking at a possible domino effect because other bondholders might exercise their right and they might demand immediate repayment because of this default. If that happens, is that just another Pandora's box here?
Well, that is potentially quite serious. Failure to pay one set of bondholders could trigger a demand for accelerated repayment of all the other bonds, so potentially $120 billion worth of claims.
U.S. stock futures have been higher on hopes that the Fed chairman will hint at further easing. And corn, by the way, moving toward an all-time high as U.S. crop conditions become even worse.
There have been comments from Ben Bernanke, the chairman, last night, suggesting that even if there was a tapering back, a slowing down of asset purchasing, of the drug keeping all these markets alive, really.
Quantitative easing 3 is being called quantitative easing infinity because the end date is uncertain. Reportedly $40 billion a month will be spent for QE3. The money will go to banks in exchange for mortgage-backed securities. The Federal Reserve will presumably end up owning huge numbers of American properties because it essentially bought them with money created from thin air.
How dare you interfere with these decisions?
Wage growth, though, still nowhere to be found. I kind of think it's steady as she goes.
Global GDP rebounded, and investor appetite for risky assets such as global equities increased. But success came with a price tag in the form of excess liquidity, potential market distortions, and hot money flows. In other words, getting out of quantitative easing is going to be a lot harder than getting in.
You're going to jeopardize American capitalism. We're the best financial system in the world because we pay this money. And I think that just gave the people in charge a sense of their own invulnerability.
Fannie Mae has manipulated, in my judgment, OFEO for years. And you have about 3% of your portfolio set aside. If a bank gets below 4%, they are in deep trouble. So I just want you to explain to me why I shouldn't be satisfied with 3%.
Because banks, these assets are so riskless that their capital for holding them should be under 2%.
Is there a way to get any of this back, particularly the $18 billion in the
yes.
in the bonuses from Wall Street?
Key point is this: you cannot legally take the money back.
That we need to stop too big to fail.
But I don't understand. It is working like an insurance policy. Ordinary folks pay for homeowners insurance. Ordinary folks pay for car insurance. And these big financial institutions are getting cheaper borrowing to the tune of $83 billion in a single year, simply because people believe that the government would step in and bail them out. And I'm just saying, if they're getting it, why shouldn't they pay for it?
I think we should get rid of it.
Well, all right, then I'll ask the other question. You were here in July, and you said that you commended Dodd-Frank for providing a blueprint to get rid of too big to fail. We've now understood this problem for nearly 5 years. So when are we going to get rid of too big to fail?
Well, some of the, as we've been discussing, some of these rules take time to develop. The Orderly Liquidation Authority, I think we made a lot of progress on that. We've got the living wills. I think we're moving in the right direction. If additional steps are needed, then Congress obviously can discuss those, but we do have a plan, and I think it's moving in the right direction.
Any idea about when we're going to arrive in the right direction?
It's going to take. It's not a 0-1 kind of thing. It's over time. You'll see increasing market expectations that these institutions can fail. And I would make another prediction, and predictions is always dangerous, that the benefits of being large are going to be small, are going to decline over time, which means that some banks are going to voluntarily begin to reduce their size because they're not getting the benefit that they used to get.
I read you on this. I read your predictions on this in your earlier testimony, but so far it looks like they're getting $83 billion for staying big.
Well, that's one study, Senator. You don't know whether that's an accurate number. Or
well, okay, we'll go back and look at it again if you think there's a problem with it. But does it worry you?
Of course. I think this is very important. And I think we need to, and we're putting a lot of effort into this. It's a problem that we've had for a very long time, and I don't think we can solve it immediately, but I assure you that as somebody who spent a lot of late nights trying to deal with these problems in the crisis, I would very much like to have the confidence that we could close down a large institution without causing damage to the rest of the economy.
Fair enough. I know we're both trying to go in the same direction. I'm just pointing out that in all that space in between, what's happening is the big banks are getting a terrific break, and the little banks are just getting smashed on this. They're not getting that kind of break, and that has long-term impact.
The mistake that was made by, frankly, the Bush administration more than anybody else, but some others joined in, which was to give everybody a house to own. I continually argue that for some people in certain economic categories and in some social categories, rental housing is the appropriate form.
But didn't you, Barney, didn't you support Fannie Mae and the like? Didn't
for
you
rental housing, yes. I was very critical. I was pushing them to do more rental housing, and that's a big distinction. I mean, you're getting millions of dollars, you're getting all these other perquisites.
Now let me again acknowledge the extraordinary leadership
of Mr. Frank. He has been an exceptional leader in the Congress, but never has his knowledge and his experience and his judgment been more needed than now. And I thank you, Mr. Frank, for your exceptional leadership, Mr. Chairman.
This is not the .com situation. Homes that are occupied may see an ebb and flow in the price at a certain percentage level, but you're not going to see the collapse that you see when people talk about a bubble. And so those of us on our committee in particular will continue to push for home ownership. Degree of meltdown in the housing field that nobody or very few people foresaw. I don't think that Fannie and Freddie are financially insolvent. I don't think they need large bailouts. Fundamentally, I don't think there is a crisis. Even if there were a problem, the federal government doesn't bail them out. But I am confident with the Obama administration in power, we're going to see a difference. You know, we're going to see a laboratory experiment in America. The Bush administration got to deploy $350 billion of this money. They insisted they get all $700 right away. We said no. We're going to cut it off at the halftime and see what happens. Now the Obama administration is going to do it. And I spoke today to Larry Summers, to Secretary Geithner. You are going to see an administration today that's going to be much tougher on this kind of excess.
After weeks of focus on Syria, Obama would try to put more emphasis on the economy.
We need to grow faster. We need more good-paying jobs. We need more broad-based prosperity. We need more ladders of opportunity for people who are currently poor but want to get into the middle class.
Time for today's company news. Lloyds Banking Group is said to have suspended at least 2 traders after its settlement with the Bank of England over LIBOR allegations. That's according to a person familiar with the matter. Lloyds says 4 of its traders manipulated the BBA sterling repo rate between 2008 and 2009.
They've had to take this £290 million fine, a record fine, because they've been rigging rates, systematically rigging rates.
You know, Citigroup's involved, JP Morgan's involved, Bank of America's involved in terms of setting this rate. So if they were colluding, as the allegations going back years, if it's all of them, this is a huge deal.
At least 12 other banks are under investigation, possibly as many as 18.
The regulators are once again asleep at the switch.
And some of the challenges that we've had over the last several months actually have to do with the fact that in Europe we haven't seen them deal with their banking system and their financial system as effectively as they needed to.
They're saying, I don't want to pay these sophisticated investors. You know, it's
turned into something a little bit more complicated.
And you would agree with Argentina?
You have sympathy for the devil.
It's not that I have sympathy for the devil. In my opinion, hate the game, not the player. Whether we're talking about Paul Singer, Kyle Bass, or any one of these other hedge fund managers, they're living within the confines of the rules. If the government doesn't like the rules, change them in the future.
Here's the problem. The player is the game. You cannot write a law, you cannot write a bond structure that will prevent someone like Paul Singer from deciding he doesn't feel like accepting a default. And so why I worry about this decision is that there's a moral hazard on the part of the creditor, too. You know, we have a problem with hot money flowing around the world.
Say right now to the Go to Cash crew. They're like, oh, go to cash. You were out having the beverages of your choice last night, and 4 people said, go to cash.
Go to cash.
After the 3rd drink, they said, go to cash.
Yeah, right. In other words, there is not enough euphoria right now in the markets. There's a skepticism. Go that far?
I still think, even just in conversations with our clients, I would still describe most institutional investors as having one foot out the door. Very quick to look for a pullback, and I think what we'll see is how fragile sentiment is. It won't take a 15% decline to wash people out.
Is that the case across the world, not just investors in U.S. stocks, but elsewhere?
I'd say absolutely. I'd say in our discussions with clients in Europe and Asia, a very similar message.
LIBOR is the base rate for loans, securities around the world. Supposedly, there's some $800 trillion worth of securities, loans, derivatives, etc., that are based upon the LIBOR price. If they're rigging that, they're really messing up the system in a horrible way.
Why do all these big banks have all the power? They're schemers. Schemers trying to control their little worlds.
You belong to me.
Due to the financial irresponsibility and incompetence of your leaders, we have begun by eliminating the worthless green paper, which your government has deceived you into believing is valuable. And out of the ashes will arise a new order.
a new world order in which nations and peoples with different systems and different values
Official Thor News alert. Warning. These are strange days and they just keep getting weirder. And be ready for anything. The quickening has gotten quicker. Question mark, question mark, question mark, asterisk? Seriously, bro. I, Thor of Thor News, be presenting this presentation.